Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Real, Raw and Relevant show with me, Lockie McNeil, your host. Thanks for taking the time to join us. It's really cool. I see some friends are jumping on there now. So hi Mark and hi Sienna Willow. It's really cool to see you guys. I take it that's mum watching and not the girls, but hey, that's all okay. Hi there, Kaz. Kaz is a local celebrity here in Taupo. She runs the markets. You should go to the markets on Sunday. Just a plug for the Market Central there. That's all really cool. Hey, we are continuing our theme that we started with the first few episodes talking about mental health. I didn't want to walk away from that too quickly because there's heaps to talk about. And so episode 3, we're talking all things regarding resilience. It's a word I've wanted to understand because I've heard it a lot in regards to mental health and I haven't always understood it completely. So tonight's guest seems imminently more intelligent and qualified to talk about the subject. And so I'm going to be bringing Dr. Lehan Stemmet on the show very, very soon. He's kindly given me plenty of his time for this interview, and we've been getting to know each other over the last couple of weeks with Zoom calls and messaging. He's been absolutely fantastic. Before we talk to Dr. Stemmet, if you like what we're doing here, please like, share, comment. We really appreciate your feedback and obviously getting the word out about what we're doing. Hi there, Jess. Really cool to see you. There's Debbie Alungia from Auckland, all the way from the North Shore. You've got to feel bad for our Auckland friends and those, especially in the Waikato and Northland and stuff with lockdowns. We won't talk about lockdowns tonight because that won't be good for our mental health. Focus on something else, which would be really cool. Hey, and like what you're already doing, say hello in the comments. So yeah, please like, share, and comment. We really appreciate the feedback. And if you're wondering how you could possibly support the show a little more, we have something called Buy Me a Coffee, which is kind of suits me because I love coffee, but the idea is you can't actually buy me a coffee if you're in lockdown or somewhere else in New Zealand, or it'll be weird if you all start stalking me around Taupo throwing coffee at me. Well, actually, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad idea. Anyway, we won't talk about that too much. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Lockie, and for as little as $3, which is kind of like a cheap coffee, you could help sponsor the show or support me in what we're doing here, which is really, really cool. More important is we want you checking this stuff out because it's really cool. And after the interview, if you can stick around, we've got some important announcements to make, which you might want to hear, so stick around for that. So, okay, enough of all that talk. Let's roll our bumper and get on with the show. Well, joining me on the show right now, it's my pleasure to introduce you, and I want to get your name 100% right, Dr. Lehan Stemmet. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Lockie. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
And nice to chat. Thanks for the time.
Well, what I actually did do, to be honest, is I hyphenated your name in my notes, and I think of Han Solo, so that helps me to remind me to say Lehan. So you have a Star Wars connection. I'm sorry, that's how it's going to be in my brain from now on. So anyway, you're
Good
famous
stuff.
for multiple reasons now. So I wanted to introduce you to everybody because, number one, it sounds impressive me talking to a doctor, so that's number one. But on the back of the book here that I've been reading, it says this about you, that you hold qualifications in biochemistry, microbiology, organisational and experimental psychology, and you've worked with organisations, several industries, various senior management and leadership roles, lots of stuff. There's got to be a story behind you being a doctor and all these different areas of science you've been interested in. How about we go there to start our introduction?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I think it's for me it was quite an interesting journey because I actually went to university to become a medical doctor, and then I realized I'm going to see people die as well, but I really want to help people. So I thought, well, how do I not spend too much time redoing my first year of university, which was basically medicine, and an easy way to change from that was to go into biochemistry and then microbiology. And then it's almost like funny how the world comes back to you if you have a passion for something or a real interest in something. And one of our professors mentioned something around the role of hormones and biochemistry, actually, the role of hormones and caffeine and depression and all these sorts of stuff. And I wanted to know more about that. And he said I should go and study psychology. So I ended up studying psychology as a third major. And from there, finished my degree in biochemistry, worked in Biotechnology Institute. But the main task I had in that Biotech Institute was to help a bunch of scientists integrate into a new biotechnology institute that was built from scratch. So that was more than 20 years ago. And through that, I developed this interest in why do people struggle, with something as easy as changing an organization or changing where they live. And this whole concept of change and people and science and stress became a real interest for me. So I started studying more around psychology, neuroscience, what back then was actually called physiological psychology, if I remember correctly.
Right.
So I just became really, really interested in the sort of interaction between mind and body and brain, and how does this all fit together. And this is how it all ended up. And I think the real passion I've been carrying around for many, many years is to help people to become the best that they can be. And what I saw whenever I addressed that question with people is this challenge of stress, and that people just struggle with stress and how to cope with stress and how to get through the difficult things they experience. So I started looking at that in more detail. And I suppose the reason for all the different jobs I've done in different industries is simply because South Africa, where I grew up at the time, went through some significant changes. And so with a massive unemployment rate, you kind of take whatever job comes your way. And it so happens that every time I took a job, I ended up in some kind of a management or a leadership role. But I also think it's given me a very rich understanding of different sectors, of different industries, and the different roles that people occupy and the challenges they might be experiencing. And even if it doesn't give me the insight, I think it gives me some of the credibility as well. So I can quite often speak to people and very easily understand where they're coming from, but also give them confidence that I understand where they're coming from and what they're dealing with. And sometimes I almost complete their sentences. So I find that it adds a lot of value, and something that I actually saw as a problem back then of not being able to find a sustained long-term employment contract because of all the unemployment and the changes happening in the country. It is actually a feather on my cap at this stage because of the diversity of experience. It actually adds a lot of value to what I do on a day-to-day basis, whether in my job, whether in my personal business, or whether it's me going out and doing some research around stress and neuroscience or whatever. So, and it's also given me the opportunity to interact with a whole range of different people and get a very good understanding for where are the differences, but where are the similarities. And we're probably going to touch on some of that later on, but there are some key core elements to all human beings, regardless of where they're from, what they believe. There are some key things that I think everybody wants and needs, and that often translates into how they respond to stress and pressure and the challenges we experience as well on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I can go on for a long time, so we should probably get on to something else.
Well, you've got this broad background, and that's what partly intrigues me of talking to you, apart from the fact that you came highly recommended from some people that I really respect. So that was why I asked you to be on the show.
Very kind.
Kindly said that you do it. I have to mention, and so if people don't know and they want to go and find you, I'm going to give you a bit of another pump up. You've got the culture cred of actually done a TED talk, which is basically in our culture, Western culture, if you've done a TED talk, you've made it. So congratulations, you've made it. And
thank you so much. It's the first time someone said that to me. I didn't know that.
I don't know if I'm jealous or not. I don't know. But anyway, you can find that on YouTube, and I'll put a link to it after the interview and bits and pieces on the show as well. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk to you, and it relates to what I saw on your TED talk and what you talk about in this book, which I'm going to keep putting in front of the camera and recommending people grab it if they'd like to get a copy of it. I think you get it on Amazon. We're talking about that, is talking about resilience. And because it's a phrase I've heard so many times thrown around in the mental health space, and I have to admit, the more I've been looking at it, reading your book and looking at what other people are saying about it, I actually didn't have much idea what it really was. So that's why I was keen to talk to you about it, because I know that's, you probably won't like me saying it, but it's an area of expertise it appears you have. So let's talk about resilience.
You go for it. Yeah. I think, I don't know if you've got a question specifically, Lockie, but I think, you've just touched on it. There's such a misunderstanding of what resilience is. And I'd say the most common thing that I come across in industry and individuals is quite often people would say to me, the conversation often starts off with somebody feels stressed for whatever reason. And then it would go into this conversation around they want to be more committed, or they want their people to be more committed, or they want their people to have more energy, or they, all these sorts of things. That is actually not about being resilient. What resilient? I mean, those things for me, I would normally define that as, commitment would be something like tenacity, working longer hours and more, and it would be endurance. And I think quite often we mistake tenacity and endurance with what resilience really is. And in essence, resilience is the ability to recover from something that happened. And a lot of people refer to things like bouncing back. But what we often say when we say that people should be bouncing back when we talk about resilience is we forget that you've got to have something to bounce back from. So if you use the analogy of a tennis ball, for example, if I take a tennis ball and I throw it and say the tennis ball is resilient because it bounces back, it only bounces back when I throw it against something it can bounce back from. Otherwise, it just continues to go. So I think the same applies to resilience, as we often forget that resilience requires us to have something to bounce back from. There's no resilience without pressure. There's no resilience without stress. The same way there's no fitness without something that pushes your heart rate and your blood pressure up, and therefore you need to recover. So people who are very resilient are people who recover from a challenge much sooner as well, the same as somebody who's fit. Somebody who's fit, they recover much faster. And so alongside that, then, there's no resilience without rest. So I think there's got to be something that gives us a challenge, and there's got to be some rest as well, an opportunity to rest. And there can't be resilience without those two things. And that's why this assumption that resilience is about tenacity and endurance, I think that's where sometimes people get into trouble, because they think resilience means I've got to be able to do more, I've got to continue for longer. But actually, resilience is all about building rest into our day, into our week, into our month, into our year. And actually not even waiting until the end of year holidays. It's the day-to-day way that we recover from things. The other thing that's good about resilience is there's no such thing as a resilient personality, and that's good news for all of us. Okay. Resilience is a process. And we might touch later on what are the steps of resilience, but I think it's such an individual thing. Same as fitness, people who do different sports have different ways of being fit. They do different exercise to maintain their fitness, and they've got different ways of recovering as well from being fit. So resilience is more of a process than it's a personality. And I think we have to have time to recover as well. Otherwise, we can't be resilient.
And that's why I guess this has kind of intrigued me to talk about, leading on from the show we did last time about burnout, because I probably would be fair to say prescribed to the other way of looking at resilience, that it's all the things you said that it's not is probably how I approached that, and that's why people like me end up getting burnt out, because I wasn't a resilient person. I kept going and going, but I wasn't able to bounce back. And that's why I find this kind of intriguing, trying to rebuild, I suppose for me personally, trying to rebuild my life emotionally and my mental health. Okay, how do I build resilience into my life and take it beyond hey, that's a great word to say, to actually practically, what does that look like and what does it mean? And last night I was actually sitting down and getting ready for this, and I was looking online, as you do, and Googling resilience, and I was blown away by the number of so-called clever people who've come up with charts on resilience. And I wrote some of it down. You have the 5 pillars, the 10 facets, the 8 practices. I had a whole section on a piece of paper. I was writing down going, no wonder people are so confused about what resilience is. And again, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I wanted, and somehow, in the short amount of time we have together, to work out how we would explain it to people so they can understand it, and then build some resilience in their life, if that's the right way of saying it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're right. There are so many definitions, the same way there's so many definitions around stress. It's very unclear. And it's quite interesting you mentioned that, because the articles that I review, the scientific articles I review, quite often, obviously they're about stress resilience and the neuroscience and physiology around that. And very often, I'd say probably most of the time, my main comment on those articles that researchers in the field send in to journals is that they haven't been clear on the definition of stress, and they haven't been clear on the definition of resilience. And I think it's key. We've got to really understand that resilience is not the ability to continue on for longer than we should. We've got to find time to rest. And so I think one of the things that I'd say in terms of mental health then is, because quite often that's what leads to mental health concerns. Things like burnout. You've mentioned burnout. We talk about stress conditions, anxiety. We talk about depression. Very few people know this, but 75 to 90% of all psychological and physical illnesses can be traced back to stress as the onset.
Okay.
And so then we've got to be clear on what is stress. How do we define stress? And we can maybe dig into that a bit later on as well. But in terms of resilience, then how do we handle the things that come our way? I think a key thing here is what I've mentioned already is the ability to rest. But then another side to that is to understand the resources we need. And quite often when I say resources, I also refer to things called resourcefulness. We can often say that we don't have resources, but I've been in communities in the middle of Africa where people from our Western worldview would seem to have nothing. They don't seem to have any resources, yet they're incredibly resourceful. In other words, if the hut blows down in a strong wind or a cyclone or whatever, they just rebuild it. They find what they need to do what they need to do, and that's resourcefulness. And the reason why that's so important is if we look at mental health, what a lot of people are talking about, even the military talk about this mental health in a continuum. You're not mentally healthy or mentally ill. There's a continuum of healthy, and then there's this sort of this idea of people react to something that happens in their lives. And if that's not done successfully through, let's say, being resilient and being able to bounce back to that normal layer of functioning, when we've got a challenge in our life, that might spill over into what we call injury. And if injury isn't taken care of, we spill into the whole area of mental illness then. So there's this continuum that I think we've got to be aware of as well. We're not either healthy or ill. There's a bunch of stuff that happens. And quite often when we react to things, so let's say we're healthy, things go well, something happens. We lose a job, lose a loved one, whatever it might be. That's a challenge that we are faced with. And I think this is the key thing where resilience then comes into play, is it's something that happens external of us. And then we've got this thing called perspective. So how do we see that thing? Which is a really important element of resilience. So I think just to summarize resilience and how we deal with things, what are the key elements of it, the kind of stuff that you can do tonight or tomorrow, it's to understand what are not the steps of resilience, but I'd say rather the parts of resilience. Because quite often I think we're looking for steps and we think we can go through the steps and then all is done. But what I think we have is we've got a set of parts, and those parts need to work together. And so one of the parts of resilience is to see things in perspective. It's a key element of resilience, is we must see things in perspective. It's the whole notion of molehills don't become mountains, right, but equally mountains don't become molehills. And that's important because, coming back to resources, if we turn a molehill into a mountain, obviously we make the thing out way bigger than it should be. But if we take a mountain of a big deal and when we think it's just a molehill that we're dealing with, what we're doing is we're underestimating how big this thing is. And we get very unpleasantly surprised by how challenging it is. And we're underprepared and we're under-resourced. So even with the right amount of time and the right amount of resources, we might actually be under-resourced if we don't see it as a big deal. So perspective is key to being resilient. And alongside that, also ask for help, ask for support. And I think it's another thing we're not really good at, asking for support, but be clear on what that support is. So let's look at perspective as one thing. And there are layers to perspective that we can go through at this time. The next element that I think is most important also for resilience is this concept called rumination. Through all of the research I've looked at over the last 20 plus years, rumination comes up consistently as the main predictor of mental illness, physical illness, as relating to stress. And rumination is all those sort of thoughts of what if only, should have, could have. People like Mark Twain, for example, would call it the worst thing in my life that never even happened. Yeah. It's something we do. And I think sometimes we do this, but we think we're reflecting, but instead we're ruminating. And so there's quite a big difference in ruminating about a problem that either happened or didn't happen or might happen, versus reflecting on what's the issue and how do I manage this. Reflection is quite different from, and probably the antidote to, rumination. It's a more positive, solutions-based focus rather than the problem-based focus that keeps on going around our heads. And rumination is very much like worry. So those are the two key things, I think, in terms of resilience. Within the time we give ourselves to recover, that's the main thing, or the two main things we should be doing as well.
So I heard you use that rumination word quite a lot in your TED talk, and it's in the book. And it's not a word, it's a word I've heard, but it's not one that we use in conversation very often. So when you said it, I'm like, oh, okay, so what does that mean? And it was really helpful for you to say it, because some of us, person in the room here, I would consider myself an expert warrior. Like, I'm really good at it. Like, and I don't want to be good at my wife gives me a hard time in the right way about it, to stop worrying about things. And it's one of the things that people used to come and talk to me about in my previous role, was going, how do I deal with all these worries? And what you're framing it around, I'm thinking, hang on a second, this fits in regards to their resilience issues, because they are ruminating about things that are out of their control, and you get all wound up. And it's that when you're lying in your bed late at night in the dark and it's just you and your thoughts, and you worry about everything, and that's probably the worst time for most of us. So developing resilience for me seems like a great way forward for, reading your book, and I've made some notes about what I want to do over the next few weeks. I think it's really key for a lot of us. And I'd love to talk about some things that you mentioned in the book. So you talk about in the book about a previous book, which we've off camera talked a little bit about. And it seems to me that a lot of people talk about resilience as survival. So how do I build survival into my life? But it's too simple. Is that right? It's too simple of a way of looking at what resilience is. Was that fair?
Yeah, I think they're not interchangeable, but they work together. And I think that's the problem. Is quite often people see survival and resilience as an interchangeable term, but it really isn't. Survival is the ability. It's almost like endurance. It's the ability to get through things. But if we want to get through those things, and we want to put a bit of a resilience framework on top of that, we've got to think about, once again, if I'm going to climb this mountain, the way to survive climbing that mountain is to have the appropriate resources. The way to be resilient while climbing the mountain is to take regular breaks, to set achievable goals, to say to myself, I'm going to take 10 steps today, I'm going to go 20 steps tomorrow, the day after, maybe my calf hurts, I'm only going to take another 10 steps. So it's about pacing ourselves as well. So I think we can be resilient within the journey in order to survive the journey, but they're two different things. I think they work together. And I think the challenge is a lot of people think about survival as if it's resilience, and they think it means I'm going to climb this mountain within the next day, whereas that's not what it means. That's going to lead to injury. What it should be is, how do I take breaks to get to the summit, because I want to see the view? And so putting those steps in place. So once again, I think resilience is not something we wait for when we have our December holidays. Resilience is something we've got to do day to day. Resilience is something we've got to do, let's say, even between meetings. My meetings quite often are back to back. But what I've learned is between those meetings, I don't think about the first meeting, and I don't think about the second meeting.
Okay.
I literally think about nothing, or I think about something really positive and constructive and useful and purposeful. Because and that's part of resilience. What I say is you build these little moments to recover from the one thing and to prepare for the next thing. Because if we just carry on, the stuff just becomes cumulative, and cumulative stress has been shown to also lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, quite frankly. So it is a cumulative issue for all sorts of reasons. It could be hormonal, it could be psychological, and a whole bunch of other things as well. So I think the survival issue and confusing that with resilience is what a lot of people do. But resilience is actually the ability to rest while we try to survive. So if you think about, it's interesting you mention that, because for the first time in, I'd say, about 20 plus years, I notice a lot of people who used to call me to come and do things with them around resilience actually wanting to talk to me about mental health. And the question they have is not about how am I resilient, it is about how do I survive this thing that we're going through called COVID-19 pandemics. And so the question they have is a survival question. But we always come back to, so how do you build moments to be resilient within your day? Because what people want is, they think once COVID is over, then we can be resilient. My question is, what if this mountain is so big that we can't yet see the summit? So how do we build those moments of rest within? Because we don't know. We don't know where the summit is yet. We don't know where this is going to end up. So how do we build those moments to rest in between while going through it? It's called pacing ourselves. It's like the difference between the long distance runner who wants to run the 10 kilometers at the same pace as a sprinter. Not going to make it. Going to fall over. So building those little moments in, I think, is really important for rest. And that's where the resilience comes in, coping with big deals.
Now, isn't that interesting that some of the things you're talking about, they actually link in other areas of mental health as well, because burnout, depression, all those sorts of things is all about, for people like me and others that are watching or related to this, we live in a culture of go, 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 and something that popped up in my thinking the other day, and I wrote some notes on about, I really relate to that movie line in Fast and Furious. I don't drive like that. I just want to make that clear. And I think it's the main character says he lives his life a quarter mile at a time. And then I looked at my life over the last 20 years and I've probably gone, I've lived my life a quarter mile at a time, and then a quarter mile at a time. I've just gone, right, I've done that quarter mile. Where's my next one to do? I've got to go. And I hadn't planned those breaks in between. And because I consider myself a survivor and a hard worker, I then put on this mantle, well, I'm resilient because it hasn't killed me. But that's not resilience, is it? Because
No.
it's not just about avoiding death and surviving to another day. There's something bigger going on here. And there was something you said in the book, and I want to quote it. Resilient people spend less time pondering their problems and spend more time thinking of solutions. Because you talk about the ruminating, and I thought, isn't that like you've made that comment? I thought that was really cool. It actually helped me to sit down. I actually started writing a list.
It's such an interesting thing. So once again, going back to rumination, a couple of years ago, I did a study, a research project, and specifically looked at rumination as a topic. And I was wondering whether you can split them into two. In other words, can you have ruminating about future things and ruminating about things that happened in the past? And what we saw in two different separate samples, that in both samples are replicated, you could ruminate about the past and the future. And so I became really interested. So which one of those two? Now, if rumination is something that leads to all these, it's the number one predictor of depression, anxiety, deliberate self-harm, physiological illnesses, and so forth in terms of psychology. And in both samples, ruminating about the future consistently predicted or out-predicted ruminating about the past, which was quite interesting for me because if you go back to Sigmund Freud, who said it's our past issues that normally gets the better of us, this was quite contradictory to that it's actually our concerns about the future that seems to get us into trouble. But what I then saw in Christchurch after mosque attacks and earthquakes and so on is that the way the past then played a role in this is people were concerned that the past might repeat itself in the future. So they were thinking about the things that happened in the past and they didn't want to go through that ordeal in the future again. So that's a form of rumination which kind of just plays this thing that just happened over in their minds as if this might happen. And so what happens quite often is we try so hard to avoid and prevent those things from happening in the past instead of proactively thinking about, so what else is it that we can do? What is the proactive actions instead of thinking about this problem that happened and might happen again and how will we ever do this? Resilient people seem to take action. They start to be proactive about putting things in place. In other words, I often refer to toolboxes. So I'd often say that you've got three toolboxes. The one toolbox is the preparation toolbox. Then there's a maintenance toolbox, and then there's a repair toolbox. And so we've got to have things in these toolboxes where we can prepare ourselves. So what is that? Preparation is things like finding the resources we have, putting the support network around me, finding out who my local doctors and mental health support workers are, getting coaches and mentors. That's the preparation sort of stuff. The maintenance toolbox is the stuff like rest. How do I rest? How do I recover? How do I maintain a level of functioning? And then the repair toolbox is if in the likely event, I'm not going to say like they say in the airplanes, unlikely event, but in the likely event that something bad happens, how am I going to cope with this? What do I have in place? That's the repair toolbox. So we've got to be ready for that as well. And I think, what you've just touched on in terms of rumination, worry, and being proactive, all the research these days point towards the fact that being proactive gives us a sense of control, and a sense of control gives us a sense of confidence. And a sense of confidence, we've known for a very long time, confident people seem to deal with challenges and stress way better than people who are not confident. So, it's like almost, if you think about walking into an office, I'm trying to see if I've got a sample I could maybe point my camera to, but if you've got a pile of papers lying around, we just feel out of control. And quite often life feels like that as well. And we scurry to get to all these things, but we don't know how far we've gone with that. Whereas resilient people seem to say, okay, well, what I can do is I can put this pile of paper together and then I can sort them. I can prioritize things. And then slowly but surely they track their progress through that. And the reason why that's so important is I think what we quite often forget in terms of survival is the importance of motivation as well in our resilience journey and our ability to bounce back and building confidence. And so the resilient people are very good at being proactive, but they track their progress as well. So they set themselves achievable goals, because achievable goals gives you a sense of progress when you achieve them. And that gives us an incredible sense of involvement, but also of motivation and actually being able to carry on for longer. And I find that so important during this COVID situation. About 2 weeks ago, I was running a couple of workshops for people who work in an environment where I'd say 90% of what they do feels like a just daily grind with no progress. And so the thing that got to them is all the experts, you might have heard this as well, all the experts tell us that it's so important to have a daily routine
Okay. Yeah.
during COVID. And so I can agree with some of that, but I think daily routines helps us to get through a day, but it doesn't keep us motivated. Because people need change, they need novelty, they need something that's purposeful and meaningful. So that's the other thing that resilient people do to survive this journey that we're on, and we don't know how long it's going to last. They build meaningful things into their day that is not just routine, but it's actually something that they feel, hey, this is new, it's novel. It helps them to feel energized, and it helps them to have a sense of achievement as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be something as simple as an exercise routine. It could really be that simple. It could be something as simple as saying, I've got a book that I want to read through, or it could be something as simple as signing up for a Coursera free course online and saying, I'm going to finish this course in the next 4 weeks and I'm going to commit to that. It's that sense of achievement of a goal that keeps us going as well. So yes, there's the rest, but yes, there's the routine that's important, but yes, there's also the need for novelty, the need for something that is new. Contrary to popular belief, people actually do like change. A lot of people say they don't like change, but they do like change. That's what we just like the change to be in control of. And so I think a sense here of finding some sense of control in the situation we have is really important for us to maintain a level of, call it sanity, while we go through what we need to go through, and then build those resilient times into our day as well. But it's not just about mental rest or physical rest. It's actually, there's got to be something else to that resilience as well. I think it's got to be something that's purposeful. It's got to be something that's meaningful to help us through, because otherwise it's just activities rather than something that gives us a sense of what I would call fulfillment, for the lack of a better word.
Well, see, that task thing's interesting because ever since I got into my working life, I was introduced to the Franklin Covey way of doing things, if you're familiar with that, where you have this great diary and you alphabetize your, if I said that right, your tasks, A1, A2, B, and all that sort of stuff. No one wanted to hear all that. And you had a sense of accomplishment because you got through all your tasks. But the things that you learn very quickly is you never achieve all your tasks and you bump your task into the next day. So it never feels like you actually... If you had 3 tasks and you achieve them, yes, sense of satisfaction. But when you're a person and you build your life around never achieving a full, complete day, then you never really feel like you achieved everything, even though you probably achieved a whole lot. So something that you also mentioned in there, I wanted to get your opinion on. So we talk about problems versus solutions thinking. When you are feeling reasonably in control of yourself, you can make that switch, can't you? You could sit down and go, right, tonight, I'm going to stop thinking about my problems. I'm going to sit down like what I just did today and write some notes down and go, here's all these things that have been gone wrong. Here's some solutions. If you're not in a great place, maybe you've been burnt out or whatever, would it be legit to say, that could be the help that someone could give you? You go, hey, could you sit down with me? Help me identify, well, it's easy for me to identify my problems. Can you help me find some solutions so you can build that into your life? Would that be a fair comment to say? Am I trying to pretend I'm a psychologist when I'm not? Or
No, you're right on target there, and I think that's probably the important thing is, when I talk about those toolboxes, a lot of people think they've got to do this by themselves. A lot of people think actually this is a major confusion. A lot of people think that resilient people don't ask for help. Resilient people cope with things by themselves, and that's the biggest lie I've come across.
That's really good.
I think it's so important for us to have support, and whatever that support might be. I mean, the support could come in the form of a book that you read. The support can come in the form of videos that you watch. The support can come in the form of a friend. The support can come in the form of somebody who's been along a similar journey. But because they know how this journey ends, they can maybe guide us along the path, for example. And I think there's so much value. So once again, going back to the toolbox idea, the 3 toolboxes is about how do I maintain myself and my health. The second thing is if something goes wrong, how do I recover from this? How do I repair? What is in that toolbox? So I would say it's maybe the what's in the tool, but also the who, taking your lead on that. It's the who is in my toolbox. Who do I have? And that's an important thing, because one of the key things that I think we forget quite often is the importance of people being in our life to contribute to us, but also our ability to contribute to other people.
Yeah, and that's something you
There's
bring up in
some
the
really
book. Yeah.
interesting, there's some really interesting research around that. For example, the sense of contribution and how valuable that is for our own mental health. So if we purposefully and meaningfully contribute to other people's lives, it actually has a very good impact on us, health-wise as well. It does all sorts of things. Like, you can go into the hormones and the endocrinology of that. But for example, oxytocin is one of the things that get produced. Dopamine is one of the things that get produced when we see someone um, appreciating what we've done, and vice versa. So all of those things have an incredibly good impact on our physiology as well. So oxytocin, what a lot of people don't know, oxytocin, which is also called the bonding hormone, is, for example, good at recovering or repairing heart muscles. So we don't even consider these things, but it's good for your heart to do something good for other people and to bond with people together, whether that's playing in a band, whether it's singing in harmony with other people, whether it's just being in a conversation where a lot of people laugh together and there's this good camaraderie. That sort of bonding is actually good for our heart, physically as well as socially. So I think it's valuable for us to start thinking about what is in that toolbox, but also who is in the toolbox, and not to try and go on our own. People recover very well when they have other people around them, and I think we've got to sometimes think very clearly about who those people are as well. Make sure it's the right people. Make sure it's the people who will make a contribution to us and who won't put us down any further, and will give us some solid advice. So it's worth sitting down and actually thinking about that. I know there's people, you might be familiar with John C. Maxwell.
Yeah.
So one of the things that this guy does, he's a leadership guru. He's very well known in leadership circles around the world. He's had a massive impact on a lot of people. One of the things he still does is he writes down a list of things that he needs mentoring in. So whether it's finances, whether it's spirituality, whether it's leadership itself, whether it's being a family man, whatever it is, he's got a list of things and who is his mentor in that. And those mentors can change as well. So if he feels, I think I've learned what I can learn now from this person, he'll pick another person to fill that space. So I think there's a lot of value to be intentional about these things as well. And that's probably a key word is a lot of people forget the importance of being intentional about how we go through life, about how we handle difficulties, about who we have in our lives and how they support us, and just about the decisions we make as well. I think it's really important to be intentional, not to fret about it, but to be intentional. And then I think another key bit is just simply not to be so hard on ourselves that we think we should be doing all of these things by ourselves. I think a lot of people are very hard on themselves. We all need support. We all, but also think how good it is for someone else to give us some support. Think about, if you've got a very altruistic nature, you feel good when you can help someone else. Maybe that's the good thing we can do for someone else, is to give them the opportunity to support us for a change. Make their day by being someone that they can add value to, is what I often say to people, is who is that person that you would like to be a value add to by being the person that they add value to. And it's a key element of resilience and just being able to get through life successfully when things get hard. And even when we've got to recover from things, people recover better when they're together.
Well, you hinted that in the book, and hopefully I'm not stretching the bow too far. You talk about the difference between the meaning of something and purpose of something, and having purpose, which is kind of related to hope. So there's all these topics that all interweave with each other very easily, and maybe gets us confused, but they have reasons for being there. If you've got some other reason for living, or you can do something for someone else, even for that short period of time, it helps get you out of your own bubble, your own thinking, out of your own head. You need that, don't we? We all need those. And Hollywood portrays that all the time. If someone's a selfish person and they have an epiphany at Christmas and they go feed the homeless on Christmas Day, and all of a sudden their world's better. Which is probably a bit silly to only do that one day of the year. But, that's that whole thing you're bringing up about having an outlet that helps you see maybe the world a little bit broader, that helps build resilience in that way, as opposed to doing the independent, I'm the man, or I'm whoever you are, and I'm going to prove everybody that I'm who I am because I'm so independent and I don't need anybody else. So dangerous, isn't it? Especially in regards to our resilience, sort of thing.
It is. And I think, it's actually interesting you say that, because a couple of years ago I saw an article from it's a business professor at a very famous university, and I won't name the university. But anyway, this professor told those masters of business administration, in other words, future managers and directors, told them that the most important thing in their organizations is them, and therefore they've got to do whatever they can do to get ahead of everybody else. And I just thought,
Okay.
well, that is such bad advice, and this is developing future leaders. And I think touching on what you've just said, the whole thing about meaning and purpose, if that is our purpose, I think we're going to fall short, and then I think people are going to be in real trouble, because I've always only noticed problems when people have that sort of mindset, that sort of self-centered, and I'd say the problem here is that we confuse individuality with individualism.
Mm.
And that for me is a major sort of thing as well. Is it's fine to have individuality, because that's your unique characteristics. That's the very stuff that you can add value to other people too, and basically backfill where they fall short, where they can again bring their identity to us, or the individuality to us, to backfill where we fall short. That's the whole point of collaboration. I share what I have, you share what you have, and together we've got a meal. Otherwise, I'm just eating one bland whatever it is. Whereas individualism is that kind of notion that professor told of that, to those sort of business students, it's all about me. Generally speaking, anything with an ism at the end is problematic. But I think, coming back to the meaning and the purpose question, everybody does talk about the importance of finding meaning and finding purpose. And quite often, I think those two things once again interrelate as well. We've got to understand the meaning of something before we can actually use it for its proper purpose. And the same applies to us. As like, what's the meaning of me being on this planet, and therefore what is the purpose, or maybe vice versa. Once I establish the purpose that I can fulfill in someone else's life, maybe I'll understand the meaning of my life then as well. I think those two things is so interchangeable, because they work together. But I may use an analogy to explain that. So let's go with something like a hammer, like something that people know. A hammer has a purpose. The purpose of a hammer is to hit things. The meaning ascribed to that hammer can change. We can either use it as a tool, or we can use it as a weapon.
Right.
And so the purpose is exactly the same. We can, it's meant to hit things. The meaning changes depending on how we use it. And I think that's another thing we've got to really be quite clear on as individuals. We all have a purpose, but quite often what happens is we take the stuff that happens in our lives and we put a different meaning onto that. And instead of it being a tool, it becomes a weapon, or it becomes something else that is dangerous to society and dangerous to ourselves. The other question is around meaning and purpose. I find a lot of people asking the question, let's say they're in pain or they're struggling with something. They quite often ask the question, well, what's the meaning? What's the purpose in this pain? And the wording here is quite important. It sounds like semantics, but the wording is really important. I believe that asking questions puts us in a different frame of mind as well. So if I ask the question, what is the purpose in pain? Some people might find the purpose in pain, but they don't find purpose in pain, if you know what I mean. Like, while going through pain, they might find purpose through doing something else. But the pain itself doesn't necessarily give them purpose. And so the question here is then, what is the purpose of the pain? There's a big difference between asking what's the purpose in the pain and what is the purpose of the pain. And so I think one of the examples I use in the book as well is congenital insensitivity to pain. If you ask those people what is the purpose of pain, they would very clearly tell you the purpose of pain is so I don't hurt myself, burn myself, etc., etc. So I think we've got to ask the questions differently. There's no purpose in getting burnt, but the purpose of pain is so that they don't get burnt when people have that sort of condition. And so if you extrapolate that to life, and maybe it's becoming a bit philosophical, but I think it's really important for us to understand that some of the things we experience in life could be painful, and quite often our focus is on what's the purpose in this pain instead of actually what is the purpose of this. Maybe I'm in this situation for some other reason. And if we ruminate too much about the pain and not about the purpose of the pain, and maybe what other doors and opportunities it opens up, in other words, what can I do with this? What can I do while I am in this? What does this allow me to do? Or maybe it allows me to think in a different way, a way that I've never thought of before. I think that's a fundamentally different question. And certainly that's what I had to go through when I went through the deal with the journey. Is I started asking the question instead of the what's the purpose in this, I started asking what's the purpose of this. And so I think maybe alluding to that earlier on, a simple example would be not being able to find permanent work in South Africa at the time for all sorts of political and non-political reasons. I would quite often ask the question, well, what's the purpose in this? But when I said, what's the purpose of this? Quite often, retrospectively, you look back and you go, wow, now I get it. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now. I wouldn't be able to speak to thousands of people, to write a book. What credibility would I have? What understanding would I have to be able to share some really valuable things with some people if it resonates with them? So asking the question differently is also quite important, I reckon, in terms of resilience, because it sets our mindset. In other words, it changes the frame of mind. It changes the perspective. Is the key element of resilience, being able to view things from a different perspective as well.
And see, this is why. Sorry, just hit the wrong button there. This is why. This is kind of the loaded question I'd sent to you pre doing our interview. You know, it's easy to say, well, what are the 3 steps? What are the 3 magic hints? You know, how do I, go from today being a more resilient person? We've gone over, probably in the time we have, which we've run out of time now, a huge smorgasbord of ideas and bits and pieces. And I know from watching your TED Talk, I've actually watched it multiple times and I've been taking some notes, because this topic is fascinating for me in the sense you can't just, here's the 3 steps, go do that, you're going to become a resilient person. From what you've been looking at, there's all these facets that make it, that help develop resilience in our life. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
And just starting on a journey of that, would that be the right way to approach it? Like, start changing your thinking, get some help, whatever that is, and look at a long-term thing of, I'm going to become more resilient. Would that be fair?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really important thing. So I often refer to, instead of let's say the 3 steps, I often refer to the 3 parts, or the 3 means, or the 3 whatever it might be. And so if you change the question from what are the 3 steps to resilience to what are the 3 steps to fitness, then suddenly it becomes like, well, actually, that doesn't make any sense, right? There is no, like, how do you become fit in 3 steps? There are maybe 3 things we can do consistently to be fit. In other words, you run your race, you do whatever we need to do. But I think that's a key question once again. And there are parts to resilience. There are parts that we need to continuously do, practice. It's got to do with mind. It's got to do with body. It's got to, sometimes actually what I often say to people is, if it's so hard to change your mind, you've got to behave yourself out of that mindset. And there's quite a lot of research around that as well, is that changing your behavior actually does change your mindset eventually as well. So you'd know as well as I know, as well as anybody else would know, if we sit here and try to think differently, if people say think differently, you're going to go, it's really hard. But sometimes moving out of a space, as simple as taking a walk changes our way of thinking. There's so much research about that in itself, the whole 20 minutes walk in nature, and how it reduces cortisol levels and all that sort of stuff, and opens up our way of thinking. I think once again, there's not 3 steps. There's maybe 3 things we can do. And there's quite a bit of focus these days on a psychological level to help people understand what their strengths are, and to use those things that they have access to already to become better at what they do, to become the best that they can be, whatever the situation is. So instead of basically a psychologist sitting down and saying, here's what you've got to do, here's the book, it's more a case of, well, let's explore this and see what you've got, what's on your plate, what can you do, what are you naturally good at, what do you naturally enjoy doing. So it's moving away from diagnosis to purpose. It's moving away from diagnosis to strength. And I think I see a lot of that changing. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I follow a lot of the research because of this interest that I have. And so there's this focus on, what is it that you do have? Well, once again, we get back to resourcefulness. What is it that I do have? What can I do with this? Who can support me with this? And then, keep walking in the journey, and be ready for the times when we're going to have some kind of there's this concept called WOOP. I don't know if you've heard of WOOP, WOOP.
No,
so WOOP is the wish. What is the So WOOP is it's the wish. It's the one thing that we want to achieve. The first O is the what is the outcome? So if I do this thing, what's the outcome that I can expect from that? And then the second O is the obstacle. So what are the things that might stand in my way of achieving that? And then the P is what is the plan for dealing with the obstacle? So once again, we go back to this, almost like the toolbox idea. So what is the thing I want to do? What is the outcome if I do this, or the desirable outcome? What are the obstacles? And then what's the plan of dealing with those obstacles? And that's interesting, as much as it's a simple acronym called WOOP, it's actually quite science-based. So there's quite a lot of science that supports that approach as well.
It sounds fun to say. Whoop, whoop. Sorry, I'm losing it now. It's really good. Hey, you've been so generous with your time, Doctor. I love calling you Doctor because I haven't had a doctor on the show, Doctor. So anyone out there who wants to learn a little bit more, because we could probably dig into this for another 2 hours and people would be using this as bedtime watching and listening, but we don't want to do that because your time is way too valuable. I encourage, get your own copy of this book here. We're going to put a link to that in the show notes. It's available on Amazon to download a digital version. Dr. Lehan was kind enough to send me my own copy, so maybe if you know me well, you can borrow it when I'm finished. Thank you so much for
rent
your
it
time. Yeah, rent it out. No, that's capitalism or something. Apparently that's bad these days. I don't know. I'd rather be generous. Hey, great talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of what you've learned over a long period of time, trying to condense it down into a short space of time, and really hoping that's been helpful for a whole bunch of people out there. So thank you so much for talking about resilience with us today.
Thank you, Lockie. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for the invitation as well, and for making the time. And I hope it was a valuable thing for people, and if anybody wants to get in touch, feel free to do so.
Well, look, if no one else got anything out of it, I did, so that's all that matters.
That's all that matters, I reckon.
No, not quite, but it's all good. Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lockie. Brilliant.
Wow, that was a lot to take in, wasn't it? What a great time to talk with Dr. Stemmet. Maybe you will be like me, and I'll probably go back and replay this again and again and again and making notes and tweaking my notes, because again, I think this is worth digging into, especially if you think this resonates with you. Hey, maybe you've been on this little journey trying to discover what the subject of resilience is all about, and as we were talking, I made some notes, and just as a way to, the way I've kind of summarized it, that's really helped me kind of frame this for myself. And maybe you want to write this down if you're really keen and studious like me. Resilience is not about resistance. Resilience is all about bounce back. If that's the only thing you get out of this session, I talk with Dr. Stemmet tonight, resilience is not about resistance. Resilience is all about bounce back. You are on the way to figuring this thing out and having it have an impact on your life. And I've forever thought that I need to get tough and fight my way through life, and then I decided that's what resilience meant, and I'm learning now that resilience is learning how to handle the things that come into our lives just that little bit better. So go easy on yourself if you're learning. We're all in this together. Go easy on yourself. I made mention in the interview about something, and I did, and I felt like I really wanted to share it with you. And I don't know if it's a term that's used in the book. I don't think it is. I created for myself a resilience map that makes it sound more official. What I did the other day is, and it's really helped me, and I've been tweaking it as I sat down here. I'm going to hope I can do this. Whoop, bump my microphone. I'm not going to show you everything. I just wrote down on a bit of paper 2 columns, and I put what's happened to me. And then for column A and for column B, I put fresh purpose / possibilities. It's a bit of clumsy titles, but it really helped me. So as an example, in my what happened, I lost my career. And in column B, I've got an opportunity to start again. Column A, I said I had leadership failings. In column A, did I get that right? Column B, I've learnt what I can do better in the future. And to be honest, I've found that really, really helpful, because then as soon as I put it down on paper, it made somehow stronger and made more sense to me. So if that's helpful for you, how about you do that after the show, or whenever you've been watching this? Would be really, really cool. Now, finally, we promised you something if you stuck around to the end. I know this went on for a really long time, but it was so good. Dr. Stemmet, if you haven't heard already, has generously given us 2 digital and 2 physical copies of his book, which I have here, which you would have seen me flashing around again and again and again, this book to give away. So your opportunity to get it is, all you have to do is like, share, comment. Every time you like, share, and comment, you get an entry into winning this. And at the time of the show, it's Wednesday night, I'll put a note to close this off on Friday. And on Friday on this particular Facebook channel, we'll announce who those winners are and get those books out to you, which is really, really cool. We've kind of set a trend. We gave 1 book away last week, and now we're giving 4 this week. Well, we might have 8 next time. Who knows? Maybe set it rod for our own back. But anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for being with us. This was episode 3 of the Real, Raw and Relevant show, talking about resilience. We hope this makes some measure of difference in your life. Please look after yourself, and we'll see you again real soon.